Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Raynday Gaming. Did you know the Alternator has a better win rate than the R-99? The worst weapon, you would think, is better than the best weapon, you would think. Or is there something amiss in this conversation? Well, I thought so. I'm sure everyone thought so. I think people have made slightly touching commentary videos on this, but I have a special relationship to this topic, which was introduced to us a few days ago on Twitter by the lead designer of Respawn, tweeting out, fun Apex fact, the Alternator has a higher win rate than the R-99. Now, this just doesn't make any sense. So people obviously started going to the comments and asking questions, and I asked a question as well, and Daniel ended up actually making an entire thread in response to it and giving some information on why this is and why you should look deeper than just the actual stat. This is going to be a great, quick, bite-sized video on how to learn a little bit more about the design process, what statistics actually mean and how do designers use them, and what you have to infer beyond the statistics in order to make good game decisions. And also let you know, really, is the Alternator better than the R-99? We'll have to wait and see. Okay, so you'll also learn what encounter rate means, and I think this is something very important because Apex uses a few measurable statistics like win rate and encounter rate when you're referring to things that have a very hard time to be measured in this kind of blanket atmosphere, because it is a moving battle royale, and you can't just go like two people in a firing range fighting against each other and measure statistically which one is better on average over 100 times, because there's so many moving pieces in Apex and abilities. It's kind of hard to single it out, but these are the ones they choose, and that's very important to know. Some of the things that they're talking about. So he says this, and I go, okay, so how are you defining win rate? That's the biggest thing. Just what is in the final loadout of a player that wins. So essentially, hey, I have an Alternator in my hand, and so therefore, when I won the game, even though I was using a wingman the whole game, that counts as an Alternator win? Is that what we're looking at? Secondly, are we talking about a percentage of time usage, and then the end of the result of a game is a win? So say I use an Alternator for 70% of the game, right? And that kicks the threshold of you've used this Alternator most of the game to get this win. Even though the last moment of the game, I'm using a wingman, I'm using a R301, I'm doing all these things to actually grab the win. Does it still count that I won with the Alternator because I used it for 70% or 80% or whatever that threshold they've determined is in the game? These are good questions to ask. I was asking them because I just wasn't very clear, and it seemed like this fact there was something to it. Turns out there was. Scroll down a little bit more, and you can tell that the answer is it's the number of times you get a knockdown with the weapon versus number of times you get knocked down while using the weapon. So think of the answer like this. If you are shooting someone with an R-99 and you have a friend who you're doing a 1v1 with as well, and they have any weapon they want, maybe it's a Alternator or maybe it's anything else. Let's just say my encounter rate with my R-99 would be how many times I actually knocked my friend using that weapon against how many times my friend actually was able to, with whatever weapon he's using. It doesn't matter because I have the R-99, get knocked. Essentially, if I'm doing 10 duels and 7 out of 10 times I'm knocking him versus him knocking me, then that's going to count for a high percentage of kind of an encounter rate or a win rate, so to speak, versus maybe if I'm using an Alternator and he knocks me 6 times, that I've only knocked him 4 times using that weapon. So think of it like that. It's about how you're using it and how many knocks you're getting versus how many times you're getting knocked. And if it's you're knocking more than you're getting knocked, then that's going to swing positively in your direction. And so the Alternator, what they're saying is that the Alternator, when you're using it, you knock people more than you get knocked versus the R-99. So this is kind of weird, right? Thinking the R-99 actually would have lost in that 10-person duel if you're going at it like that. But there's more to the story, and he ends up unfolding that with this thread of a tweet. He actually ended up quote tweeting my tweet, which is great. And Danny showed a lot of support on Twitter lately, and he actually has done some really cool that I can't wait to share with you guys at the end of the video. You're going to want to stay for it because it's going to set up some content we're going to do a little later. But he said, that's a great question. Unlike Legends, weapons are fluid and can be changed at any point in a match. So it's hard to get the right data hooks. This is what I was talking about with what data do you choose to determine what makes a weapon winning or not. Like using it for 80% of the game, but switching it out. You didn't win it with the final circle, but you use it for most of the game. What's the defining factor? What's the hook that will give you statistically the importance? I'm not a weapons expert. I work mostly on Legends, but I checked with the smart folks, and here's what win rate means. So the answer is encounter win rate, which is this is something that they've used to determine a lot of things. Wow, I'm trying to get down away from some funny things on the what's happening. So and some not funny things. I'm trying to hide a lot going on here. So the short answer, it's encounter win rate. How many downs are scored by people using this weapon versus how many downs are scored against people using this weapon? Pretty straightforward, right? Essentially, how many times are people with alternators in their hands getting knocked? And how many times are they knocking other people? But that's not all the data we collect. We also look at average downs per pickup and average damage per pickup. The R-99 scores way higher in those categories. That's very strange. So you have a weapon that's getting more downs, right? So you're knocking people versus being knocked. However, when you pick up an R-99, you're statistically more likely to do more damage and get more downs. That's weird. How does it have a better encounter rate, but you're more likely to get more downs and you're more likely to get more? Is it who? Okay, great question. And I actually have a conjecture about that as well, because it could be that there's an element to, if I have a R-99 that's performing at certain levels and I'm getting more aggressive and I'm playing that way, it does make sense that I might get more up close into somebody's face to use that weapon and thus down people more. However, I may not actually, because I put myself at risk, be in a position to get out of that as safely. And so I may get downed also. So I may get more kills and downs, but I also may get downed. But that's not all the data we collect. This is where it gets pretty interesting. We also look, so let's return to encounter win rate. Does the Alternator have a higher encounter win rate than the R-99? Mean it's a better weapon. Ha! If only analytics were ever that easy. Make numbers easier for me, please. And he links one of the Respawn analytics and data science designers working on Apex Legends. So here's one consideration. What happens most of the time you find an Alternator? That's right. You drop it for another weapon once you find the weapon you really want. When do you fight with the Alternator then? Mostly in the early game. And this is a very key part of what these statistics, why you have to look into it. It's kind of like a lot of those stats where you'll hear of studies where, hey, the amount of time people, it says that using sunscreen actually increases your life expectancy, correlates with a longer life expectancy, right? So it's very interesting, but one of the things that, you may look at if you look deeper into things like that, that's not a real study, but that's the idea of a lot of studies that, hey, did you know that people who eat oranges actually grow up, get really muscular? It's like all of these interesting things is like, well, the activities that you must be doing as a person to be constantly applying sunscreen may be the real impact. It's not the sunscreen that's causing you to live longer. It might be that the fact that you're outside all the time, doing a bunch of activities, staying healthy, moving more than your average person, and thus applying sunscreen as a part of that process, that may be the reason that you're actually succeeding. And so this is kind of taking that backwards. Sunscreen, A, is the answer, but let's look at that deeper. Why is the sunscreen getting put on? Alternator wins. Why would the Alternator be one? This is great because this is very much like my psychology education at UCLA, and there's a lot of things with statistics and studies that you have to look at a little deeper. So hopefully you guys are learning this as well. What Daniel's saying is that in the beginning of a game, the Alternator seems to be when most people are using it. It's not a late game weapon. So early game is when the Alternator is actually being used, and these stats are mostly coming from early game moments. That's the time when other people run around with less desirable guns, such as the P2020, the Mozambique, the RE45. So it makes sense that a gun that's good compared to those, but isn't carried into late game, has a higher encounter win rate. And this is where you dive into it, because the higher encounter win rate has to do not just with the weapon itself in a vacuum compared to that weapon. It's that alternators are found in the beginnings of games, just where Mozambiques and bad weapons are also found, and it happens to be the king of those weapons. In its small pond of early game weapons, the Alternator is much more effective than a Mozambique or a P2020. So it will win on a higher statistical average most of the time. Whereas the R-99 may not be so ridiculously better than the late game weapons that it might just have a lot more downs, of course, because it's a late game, more lethal weapon, but it may not outshine the rest of the pack so historically, because there isn't as much of a discrepancy between a P2020 and an alternator as there is between an R-99 and a Spitfire, right? That might be a lot closer. All that nuanced stuff is good, but it's a lot more fun to just mic drop the alternator has a higher win rate than the R-99 and leave the room. Sorry for explaining the joke. Now, this was awesome. I really, really loved it, and it ends with this cool thing, guys. I want to hop on your stream someday and chat game design if you're down. Really enjoy your videos. So, guys, we're going to have a designer come on stream. We're going to talk more about this. If this is something you're interested in and you want to know when it is, check this out. Would love to do so, man. Let's make it happen. And great thread. Learned a lot already from the insights. Hit me up after season 9 comes out. So what does that mean? Subscribe here on the channel. Make sure you're watching my season 9 content and stay tuned for more conversations like this. Not just with me breaking this down, but breaking down the actual design stuff and some of these questions that maybe you guys have. Throw them in the comment section below that you would want to see and talk more about with Daniel when he comes on my stream after season 9. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. As always, I'll see y'all next time. I'm taking a little bit of time off this week, so I'll have shorts, I'll have videos intermittently, but I will be kind of out of town. So stay tuned with my Twitter, stay tuned with my TikTok, my stories. I'll be doing a lot more stuff on there, but you'll still have great YouTube videos coming out. All right, guys, never give up, never stop gaming. I'll see y'all next time.